Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Difanis, broker, owner of RE/MAX Realty Associates with offices in Champaign, Mahomet, and Monticello, Illinois. Today, I am coming to you eagerly and excitedly with the Champaign-Urbana metro area real estate market update. And the reason that I am excited is because I'm a data nerd and I now have gotten my hands on April data. This is a much bigger deal right now than it would be in normal years. So let me first explain some of the nature of the data markers that we look at in real estate. So the most common publicly reported data is the number of closings. The problem is when we're in this unprecedented global pandemic where the world started ending for a lot of Americans in the month of March, and then most folks have spent the month of April in some form of lockdown, the closings are a lagging indicator. That is to say that in the state of Illinois, for example, where the stay-at-home order first took effect way back on March 21st, the closings that are happening now are still mostly transactions that were under contract before all of that. So that's not super useful. What is useful is to see what's been going on now, or at least as close to now as possible. And so April has been of great interest to me because the entire month of April, especially here in the state of Illinois, where we were already under a stay-at-home order that predated the beginning of the month, that gives us a full month of this very strange new normal to see if our real estate market is falling apart or if it's holding up. So with that, let me dive into some of the data. So this is InfoSparks. This is a plug-in to our MLS. So what I am looking at is Champaign County data. Understand our metro area does extend into the adjacent counties as well, but I don't have the ability to define it by metro area. So this is Champaign County. So let's look first at homes for sale. That is the amount of standing inventory. And as you're comparing my data to stuff you might see or hear or read other places, the graph here is showing monthly. There is an option to show rolling 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. That tends to smooth out these curves, but that is not what I want for the purposes of this conversation. I need to know what the heck is going on in April. So this is homes for sale across all price ranges in Champaign County, and you're seeing the usual seasonal peaks and valleys because this report goes back 3 years, and you see the inventory then this last annual cycle run up after peak season ended in early summer and then started falling after the beginning of the year. Also note that the y-axis only goes in the range of data. It doesn't start at 0, so it's going to tend to amplify. So look at this. Our inventory, the number of homes available on the market, continued to fall from February to March. And of course, March only had part of the month impacted by COVID-19, but then still fall considerably into April. So we had 681 homes for sale on average during the month of March, and that dropped to 614 during the month of April. Now, again, this is all price ranges. Let me show you what happens if we look at what I consider for the Champaign-Urbana area to be high end, which would be 400 plus. You'll see that inventory reached the bottom in January and has actually been building since then. And that means that the number of homes that have gone under contract has not exceeded or matched the number of homes hitting the market, which has caused the number of available homes to build up. Now, I'm going to switch over to a different metric, and this is months of supply. And so this takes into account both supply and demand. And just for your reference, experts generally would say that a 6-month supply is balanced, neither favoring buyers nor sellers, but an overall balanced market. Less than a 6-month supply ends up being a seller's market, and more than a 6-month supply then starts leaning into a buyer's market. So once again, I'm in the high end range here. Now, the high end range is always going to run a higher supply than the more mainstream price ranges. So that's nothing unusual. You'll see that it bottomed out at 8.4 in recent months, but it spiked up in just a couple of months' time to almost a year's supply, and then dropped down to just under an 11-month supply in April. So the good news is, just for the very most recent month, even the high end, where things are slower and inventory is building, we are still seeing sufficient activity that the overall month's supply is coming down, or at least came down a bit from March to April. So I'm going to switch back over to all price ranges, and I'm still, again, on months supply. And look, that has been very normal. Look at what this looks like the last couple of years, when the world wasn't ending. You're seeing a very typical drop from the slowest time of the year in the fall and winter, and then typically the month supply starts going down after the first of the year and then reaches its bottom, usually in March. And we're seeing that happening here. And kind of shockingly, when we're looking at all price ranges, we're seeing that it's even lower than it has been in previous years. So let's talk about that for a minute. My theory has been that we have seen a reduction in both listings on the market and a reduction in buyers in the market. However, to the extent that one was reduced more than the other, that has still caused some very tight supply issues in very popular segments. That is to say, we've still seen bidding wars quite commonly in affordable mainstream price segments, particularly 100s and 200s. We've still seen lots of activity all the way well into the 300s, and then the 400s have been a bit slower. And my working theory on that is that most of the buyers that are in those 200, 300 ranges are people who are employed by employers that are not impacted by COVID-19. The University of Illinois is by far the largest employer in our metro area, and it is not missing a single penny of payroll in all of this. And so if you have a household where it's one or two U of I incomes, people can go ahead and move or commit to a purchase and not think twice about it. The next largest employer in our area is going to be healthcare. And while we have seen some short-term hits in payrolls from healthcare providers, because anyone not on the front lines, doctor visits, elective surgeries, well baby visits, all of convenient care, all that stuff has dropped way off in the short term. But we know that's not a long-term situation. In fact, the biggest healthcare provider here is resuming its regular elective surgery starting in less than 2 weeks. So you look at those sort of mainstream types of buyers, and they're still out there. And to some extent, our inventory has been pinched because a lot of the sellers in those segments are people who have been, over the last 6 weeks, adjusting to e-learning from home, working from home, or in some cases, certainly being furloughed or laid off from jobs altogether. That has certainly made it not optimal for putting a house on the market when everyone is essentially trapped in the house and there's an ongoing concern about bringing people into your airspace in the middle of a global pandemic. So if you're a buyer or a seller and you're wondering, well, so what do I do? You've been sitting on the sidelines either because you're coming from far away and you simply can't get on a plane in March or April to come visit and do your house hunting, or you're a seller who is considering a sale this year but wasn't certain whether to do it or not. What does this stuff mean? And what I would tell you is it is confirmation that our market, even in the month of April, where the entire Illinois economy was subject to this stay-at-home order. Now, I say entire economy. Obviously, we've had certain essential businesses and operations carved out of it, but the entirety of the state was subjected to these restrictions for all of April. And yet, our market is still seeing a very healthy level of activity. Let me go to under contract, because that is arguably our most up-to-the-minute metric. Look at under contract and compare that against a year ago. Last year, the last 3 years, March was the peak, which surprises a lot of people. March was when the largest number of buyers made purchase decisions and signed contracts. And many of those closings were happening in April, May, June, but March. So you look at March 19, 294 under contract, and then just a few less than that the subsequent month. Well, look at this year. We're at 252, so obviously there's been fewer. Well, no surprise there. We know that there's a fair number of people that are still going to buy that physically couldn't get on a plane and get here. And then once again, a very typical March to April drop-off. So you look at that stuff, and our market continues to be shockingly resilient and robust, and I've just shown you the stats to prove it. So if you are a buyer who is, or a would-be buyer, considering a purchase in the Champaign-Urbana metro area still this season, I expect that we will still see a fair bit more inventory hit the market, inventory from households that for right now have been in lockdown and we're waiting to sort of see how things went before they decided to put a house on the market and accommodate showings and the whole 9 yards there. So I do expect more late season inventory to hit than than we normally would have. And if you are a seller trying to decide, do I go ahead and sell this year? This data certainly suggests yes. We're doing very well, and depending on the segment that you're in, you may find that there's a legit lack of supply for your type of home. Thank you so much for nerding out with me today. I appreciate it as always. Stay safe and healthy.